Michael Korn.
Well, I'm only making.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right, I am told that we are online and good to go, so I will call to order the Curry County Budget Committee meeting, and if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, first up is amendment and approval of the agenda. Any
moved.
changes, Jay?
So moved.
I don't have any changes today.
Good, good.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor say yes.
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 And yes, passes 3-0. So public comments, I don't see anyone from the public here. So we'll go right into discussion action items with Keena.
All right.
Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
It's perfect.
Okay. So I just want to start by saying we won't be ready for a proposed budget probably before May 1st. And the reasoning behind this is we are dealing with a levy and the potentials of it passing or not passing. There are, I'm going to do a worst case and best case scenario budget proposal, but I want to bring the one that we need to focus our time on to this committee. And I think our time is best used if we do that after we figure out whether the levy is going to pass or not. Also, I have discovered some things that I really need to clean up in our system as I get more into the finances. There's things that need to be cleaned up, things that need to be moved around to different funds, and reconciliations that need to be done for prior year revenues that we need to account for, and I need to make sure that those are corrected and correctly reflected in our budget so we can't count on those monies moving forward. I want to just clear up any misstatements that we might have. So it has been a bigger task than originally looked at. And so I think my time would be better spent, again, cleaning that up. So then we will have a very good reflection for 25 moving forward and using, like I said, either a worst case scenario or best case scenario once we decide if the levy's a go or not. Thoughts, discussions, other directions for me?
No, I think, obviously if the levy passes, things change dramatically and that those are going to be much easier decisions as opposed to if it doesn't pass and making some of those critical ones, which I think you've been spending more of your time on preparing for. Is that correct?
Correct. I have asked for proposed budgets requesting a 31% decrease in expenditures from all funds across the board. I have received several of those back. I will compile that into a worst case scenario line item budget for everyone once we discover if the levy is going to be a go or not. I'm also revamping the cost allocation process for indirect. We have within the budget in the past, there's several line item transfers that go from one fund to all these different funds to pay for their overhead. Really, we can just have an overarching indirect cost allocation model that would account for those total expenditures in one transfer that is a little bit more transparent for people, more transparent for department heads to see that they have these one transfers just going out to an indirect instead of paying for occupancy and IT and HR and payroll and everything individual. And it's easier justified when you have a cost allocation module to give that out to like ODOT, for example. That's what every every other governmental agency that I've worked with has cost allocation models that it's a percentage that you can come up with in a methodology that's followed in order to have that overhead cost. And I want to implement that in the 25's budget as well.
Will that also reduce the potential fumbles from in a bunch of different turnovers having to happen from different departments at different times, having it all just established at the beginning of the year?
Correct. And how that works is it is a flat amount that we would divide up quarterly. And so each fund would know what their annual allocation for overhead would be, or their cost for overhead would be. We would do quarterly transfers to account for those. And then at the end of a year, if we've collected too much money, then we can allocate that money back out to those funds using the same methodology that we would use to collect those funds. Or that could be held as a contingency for shortfalls later on.
And it'll be a singular line item on their budget worksheet? It'll just be
Correct.
like administration or whatever, however it's termed?
Correct.
Okay, that's a lot better than having everything broke out, every single service from payroll to IT to maintenance to, all those overhead costs.
Absolutely. And like I said, I haven't been able to come up with a good methodology of how those numbers were comprised of in the past. And this way I can say that, HR and payroll is based on per employee, and IT is based on phones and computers. And so there really is a good, transparent, trackable process to account for that.
Okay. No, it's great. No, it's one of the, I thought was a real muddy area in our budget that nobody really ever understood. And
Yeah.
and then it got fumbled inevitably because somebody forgets to do a transfer, and then we go to do a supplemental at the end of the year, which tries to correct it all. It's not very transparent. So
Nope, not at all.
so right now you are foreseeing a 31% decrease in departments, and does that account for the current usage of road funds?
Yes, it does. So that 31% though would then, and being that we're implementing this across all funds, that would actually be a decrease a little bit bigger than necessary. So then it allows a little bit of room to then allocate, and decide where you as commissioners and budget committees want this money to go.
Okay. And then
And it's important that we keep in mind that the county is an entire agency. Everybody needs to be affected by this. It does affect every single individual in the county, every single department. And we all have to bear the burden of these shortfalls. And that's why across all funds, these have to be felt, so we can try to ensure that we maintain what we have to maintain and that we should maintain for the county.
So then I guess the only follow-up that I would ask is that, and Ted, this might fall on you, but requesting that each department provide kind of a descriptive narrative on exactly what that 31% means for their department in terms of service reductions and what that means to the community, so that when we're reviewing, we're not just looking at numbers, we're actually looking at the service delivery model and being able to make decisions based on.
For you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do on that.
I have asked department heads to provide me that information with their budget.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, the more detail, the better on those. I wouldn't skimp. Don't try to, create a vague narrative, because we really need to know the nuts and bolts of how this is going to affect each and every department to make our best decisions on what gets funded.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, John.
Keena, what's the timeline again?
Well, I want to have everything prepared. Obviously, both a good and a bad budget by May 1st. So as soon as we know whether the levy is passed or not, we can plan to roll that out for the first view. We just have to have the budget approved by July 1.
Yeah, because we'll know when, May 22nd?
May 21st, yeah, 8 o'clock, 8 p.m., I believe, on May 21st is when we get our first real look at the outcomes. The ballots you open May 5th. But we'll know hopefully at 8 p.m. on the 21st where we sit. Any questions?
So the 31%, so I understand, assumes the same level of road funds as this year?
Correct.
I don't think she can hear you, Dan.
Oh, no, I didn't hear it.
I'm looking at you thinking I can talk to you without talking. The 31% assumes the same level of road funds that were funded this year, is that correct?
No, that would be excluding those road funds.
Oh, excluding the road funds, okay.
Yes, that would take, the 31% would allot us to not have to use the road funds. It would, general funds would be about the same, but road funds were, ultimately that would cut that if we did 31%.
As I understood it, I thought that if we didn't use road funds, we'd have to go with a 49% cut.
No, that would be if we didn't use general funds as well.
Yeah, so
That was my understanding.
yeah,
go ahead.
maybe you can help clarify for me just a minute. So right now, there are 0 general funds essentially going into the sheriff's department. There's, maybe a small amount for certain little areas like SAR or things like that. But overall, right now, as we sit, the entire patrol fund is being funded by road funds. And the jail is being funded by one-time money, right? So we reduce those, when we take out that amount. My understanding was, in order to make up the general fund shortfall due to the use of one-time funds, it would be a 31% reduction in costs, not including the road funds being used by patrol at $3.4 million. And if we were to reduce the road funds, then it would look like a 49%, because essentially we're trying to fit $6 million with road funds, $6 million in, different monies, including general fund, but sustainable money, into a $12 million, essentially, allocation of funds that are not, so that, I guess what I'm saying is that's not, those calculations were based on, including different grants and state monies that departments received, i.e. like adult parole and probation is primarily state funded. The DA is state funded himself and has a grant for victims assistance. Juvenile has several different grants as well that fund different positions. I think probably the CAFA grant for assessor's office, the revenues that the clerk generates through services, their service delivery model. My understanding was that 31% did not include those monies in terms of the overall scope, but it was going to reduce their general fund liability by 31%. However, when you removed an additional $3.4 million from patrol, that number jumped up to 49%. Could you clarify where I'm off?
So it's kind of a convoluted process. So jail alone, or not jail, but the sheriff's alone, let's just look at the sheriff's department across the board alone. So the road fund of a $3.1 million transfer, that is 31% of the total sheriff's, all their little departments combined. That is their 31% decrease, was $3.1 million.
Yeah, so
If we,
when you add the
Go ahead.
when you add the one-time dollars, the 2 point, what do we have allocated in there right now in the jail? 2.6 or something like that. Of one-time money allocated to the jail. When you include that one-time money and the road funds, then their total shortfall is 49%.
correct.
Okay.
But if you just remove, and they're kind of at a different level because they're taking from both pots.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, the reduction in every other service is to help try to supplement some of a portion of the services that the sheriff
one-time money.
provide.
Correct. So that's why the 31% allocates across all funds, because if you do it across all of the funds, it would be 31%. If you did it just the sheriff's office alone, it would be that 49%. Does that make sense?
It does, but it kind of, I may need a little more help in clarity. So, because it would be a 49% reduction in the sheriff's office, which would then require the rest of all of the departments to reduce service by X amount to make up a portion of that money. Is that?
Yes. Yes. And that's how we get to that portion, is if we do the 31% across all funds,
Without using,
the whole county,
without using the 3.4 though,
That's without using road funds.
without using road funds.
without using road funds.
So if everything reduces by 3.1, then essentially we will be making up about 6 million. Is that close?
Correct.
Okay. I had my math was a little wrong then.
So if everybody bared the burden, this 31% burden, then we could help. It would eliminate the almost 50% cut across the board for just the sheriff.
Yeah, I think where I was making some of my miscalculations is I wasn't including some of the self-funded departments that have zero general fund liability, like building planning, admin, economic development, parks. So we're looking at those as also reducing.
As expenditures, yes.
But they don't have a general fund liability at all. So how does that?
They don't have they do have a liability in the indirect that isn't calculated correctly.
Okay.
Isn't or hasn't been?
So,
hasn't been?
I'm sorry, what?
It hasn't been, it hasn't been calculated correctly, or isn't?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
It's been kind of piecemealed on things, and I think overall what they were looking at was some of these funds totally being self-supporting, but they're only self-supporting on the revenue coming in for these grants. But there's the administration portion of the HR, the utilities, occupancies, IT, all that stuff that wasn't accurately reflected within these funds.
Okay.
And those are appropriate charges with any grant or contract or IGA that you have. There is always an administrative portion that you can collect on, because they aren't standalone agencies that have their own HR departments or payroll departments. These are relying on the county services to provide all those for them.
Okay.
Any more questions, John?
Keena, is there a chance, well, you do more of your stuff, that that number's gonna change, that 31% and 49%, or?
I mean, there's always a chance once you get all the way into it, and when you receive the budget back from the different departments, but I think that's a pretty significant number. And when looking at some of the budgeted numbers that I've seen over the past couple budget years, I don't think you guys were really provided with accurate reflections of some costs and things. I also believe that there's some cost-saving measures that we can put into place that will help reduce some of these expenditures that we're dealing with.
Very good.
Being more responsible, I kind of came in with this overall outsider's view, not really looking at your budget and your different expenditures. I've spent a lot of time looking at invoices and different things. Our personnel costs, once we streamline processes and procedures, those are probably going to change. The amount of money I was talking with Ted the other day, the amount of money we're spending on just processing one AP invoice is outrageous. So there's really processes and procedures and stuff that we can do to really put some significant cost savings across the board for the county.
Yeah.
So Keno, my question is about the road funds, the road fund account. And I had asked you last week or maybe it was earlier this week, for a balance on that. And my understanding is right now that account sits just under $20 million. Is that correct?
The road fund reserve.
Correct.
The road fund reserve.
Correct.
I think it was like 19.8.
19.7, I believe.
Yeah, it was just just under 19.8. So, okay, I just wanted to clarify that, and that's not going to change weekly. I don't expect a big change in that before we approach May.
Nope.
Okay. Okay.
How does that increase?
So it does earn some interest on it, correct, Kina?
It does. It actually earns a lot more interest than what was budgeted for. So when I was reviewing over the last fiscal year, it did earn about $700,000 in interest. It's at a 5% rate currently with LGIP. So it's, a pretty significant amount of interest. And I think there was only $15,000 allocated as interest earned last year, and we did a little over $740,000, I believe.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, it's LG IP is definitely a place for that money to sit. It's earning more interest than it would ever get in a CD or a money market elsewhere.
Sure.
One more question. So, new guy here, just some questions. So when you look at your new budget year, I call it same store, but if you have basically the same amount of revenue, the same amount of revenue as last year, so again, including the 3.4, whatever the road funds were, are our costs, how much are our costs exceeding what our revenue is? In other words, are we incurring a lot more costs versus that revenue to the point, how much that 31%, wouldn't be 31%, but if you had the 3.4 back in, what would it look like? Assuming the same revenue as this year, what are we projecting our costs to do? So you came up with.
I'm sorry, he's really breaking up.
You came up with 31%, taking 3.4 million out, right?
Well, plus 2.6 in the jail. That is one-time federal dollars.
Okay.
So it's those two combined.
Okay. So if we keep that out, or say that was the same, we kept that back in, what would our deficit be? Have we looked at that number? How much of our costs exceeding, how much are our costs going up that we should be thinking about? Or do we know that?
Much of the costs are going up would exceed that savings.
Well, I think anytime you prepare a budget, you've got to look at what your annual costs are doing, right?
Yep.
You're pointing out some things that looks like we can have some reductions, but
Yep.
kind of a key metric is if we had the same revenue from whatever source, what are our costs going up? What should we be thinking about on an annual basis that we're incurring 10% increase in costs or 12%? Do we have any way to look at that?
So,
costs going up, those kind of things.
So we have a contractual obligation with the two collective bargaining agreements. So both of the salary schedules, one is 4%, the other one I believe is 3.5%. And then there's merit increases that are written in. So on average, just salary, you're looking at in between a 7 and an 8% increase just on the salary. And then benefits have gone up somewhere. Actually, we're switching. Benefits went up significantly for FY24. We are switching to a different health insurance under a different for the non-represented employees, which is going to save the county a lot. Otherwise, health insurance just slightly increased. We're really in a good spot for that. I want to say 10% is probably a good safe salary fringe increase, which is actually a lot better than what was budgeted for last year. So
That'd probably be one of your bigger cost items then, on an annual basis, that would increase.
what are the costs? I'm sorry, it really broke up.
I said that would be probably one of your bigger cost items would be labor then.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's when we requested the 31% cut across the board. Unfortunately, that's going to have the largest impacts on FTEs. There's just no way around that.
Yeah, I know in the past, our budget was built around, it was in between 80 to 90% of our budget is personnel countywide. So yeah, this definitely isn't pens and paper, like
Nope.
it's personnel resources for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's what's made this, difficult for a lot of department heads, is because they are looking at overhead, or not overhead, but actual headcount reductions. I'm happy to say, though, that a lot of department heads are being creative, combining some positions, looking at other funding sources for positions. It's really been an exercise, really, to make people think outside the box, which has been kind of nice to see that they are realizing the importance of this and taking it upon themselves to look into some different ways to finance some of their positions.
So just to add on to Dan's comments, so our annual assessment, that was established by, I think it was Measure 50, allots for a 3% increase annually in assessed values. So in general, the county generally sees about a 3% increase in revenues annually to offset some of those COLAs and things of that nature. This year's COLAs were extraordinary because of, the state of our economy. So if you take your 10% minus the 3% and increase assessed values, we're at 7%. The 31% in capital, it also captures that 7% within it. Obviously, some of that would be reduced because we'd be reducing personnel by X percentage, which would reduce some of those personnel costs, probably bringing it down just a touch. But that's all inclusive. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay.
Last question, and I'll be done, sorry.
Yeah.
How do you handle CapEx expenditures is that part of our process or not? Capital expenditures?
Yes, it is.
And the cash needed for that, how's that handled?
I'm sorry.
He asked about capital expenditures and how those dollars are sourced.
How they play into, are they depreciated like a normal operation, or how does that work? So let's say we want to spend $2 million in CapEx. Is that part of this budget, or are we handling that outside just as a capital expenditure, depreciating that, or cash for that?
So we have a capital expenditure depreciation schedule. It's a pretty standard one for government accounting. Depending on, so it's not it's not on a cash basis, it's on an accrual basis. So overall, the capital assets would depreciate over, if it's a vehicle, we have a 5-year depreciation schedule for a vehicle that goes out.
And so do we have separate funding set aside for those expenditures?
Yes, we do. So we have a like for vehicles, for example, we have a can't remember what it's called. It's a vehicle reserve fund, Fund 605. And so in the event that the sheriff's office wants to buy a vehicle, they pay into the capital or the vehicle capital asset fund. And then we finance the vehicle out of that fund. In the event that they, don't have the funding within that, there is some capital expenditure reserve in there that we could buy a vehicle, and then they can do an interfund loan to pay ourselves back for those. But yeah, we do have a specific capital asset account for vehicles, the large capital asset process. They do not live within the actual funds.
Thank you.
Anybody else? John? Nick? Dave? Nothing?
So moral of the story is, if when the levy passes, we will be somewhat looking at a status quo budget, but we'll be fully funding public safety with the levy. They'll have a separate oversight committee, a 7-member oversight committee, to ensure that those levy funds are spent adequately or correctly. If it doesn't, then we will be making some really hard choices. And hopefully we will be as informed as possible to make those difficult choices.
I will ensure that we provide as much detail as possible on the effects of these budget cuts per fund, so that you guys can have the knowledge that you need in order to make those difficult decisions.
Okay. Thank you, Keena.
So just to clarify the timeline, Keena, May 1st is when we'll get essentially a first look at that, at what those will look, not exactly, but a pretty close look.
Correct.
Either way.
Yep.
And then, and that May 1st timeline, when we get that first look, that still keeps us in line and in accordance with the state mandates for our budget cycle, correct?
Yep, we'll be good.
Okay. So based on that recommendation, our next meeting should be right around that May 1st time.
Yes, May 1st is a Wednesday.
Conflicts? Is that a BOC meeting day? Conflicts?
Actually, I think it is.
Conflicts for you guys?
None on my end.
Works. I think we have it before our BOC meeting.
Yeah, I don't want to wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a 6 o'clock meeting, BOC meeting, so we can have it in, anytime.
Dan, are you good with that time? Nick?
Dave?
All right, then we'll schedule that meeting for, is this a good time, you guys? 1 o'clock? So we'll schedule that meeting, Keena, for May 1st, and that'll be at 1 PM.
Perfect.
Is that does that align with when you are present, or will you probably be?
I will make myself present for that meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then
Yeah.
we'll expect a little bit more time allotment on that one, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So,
Okay.
all right. Any last comments from anyone? All right. Thank you once again, Keena. Very much appreciated.
Absolutely.
You're,
Absolutely.
you're invaluable to us at this point, and we really appreciate all the extra work, and I know you're putting in a lot of extra work, and it's very much appreciated. All right,
I'm
everyone.
happy to be here.
We will adjourn this meeting then, and we will.
Just real quick,
ahead.
sorry, before you adjourn, does anybody want to just discuss amongst the budget, after hearing what she said, just discuss with the budget committee, any discussion there before we adjourn?
How does it compare to last year?
Well, so here's the reality. Last year, the budget hadn't been reconciled. We were 2 fiscal years behind in reconciliation. So we were working off of best estimates, educated guesses at best. And so, we knew that we had some one-time money that could be allocated. Obviously, we should never be in favor of using one-time money for personnel costs. But we did, to continue to fund the jail in particular. And in that process, over many years, the sheriff's patrol has become increasingly dependent upon road funds, to the point where this last year it was 100% dependent on road funds. So we put in the stopgap, stopped the bleeding, funded this year, knowing that we were going to get those books reconciled, we were going to have a real number, and we were going to kind of understand exactly where we were going into 24, 25.
We also had another issue, though, and that was the cyber attack, because we had to realign that one-time money to cover the expenses associated with that. So that money couldn't be used for this coming cycle.
Right.
Two, I want to say,
It's still going, right?
Well,
yeah, it is still going.
We had 2.1 in ARP funds at that point to utilize. And there was 758 and change left, which we're looking at potentially 500 of that being allocated to the clerk's office to restore lost files from the cyber attack. So really that went away. The one-time money that we utilized for the jail was LATCF fund,
Tribal.
local and tribal consistency fund. So, and we understood that was going to be essentially one-time money that we were putting towards those services. So,
But there's also additional costs with our the new IT system that we have in place now. There are additional costs that come with that are yearly expenses now that we didn't have before, just to be in line with current protocols in cybersecurity that we've had to implement. And obviously, we cannot afford to go through another cyber attack. So it's very critical to this county, and it's very critical to our ability to provide services that we maintain that. And those costs are, quite a bit. We were, I want to say before the cyber attack, Dan, we were only spending about $196,000 is what we're expending towards IT services, who we were contracting with Coos Creek Electric. Now that's changed quite a bit and is much more in line with the current standards that we need to have in place.
there were a few missteps
those are-
with the IT piece. Obviously, when you're paying for a contracted service like that, a lot of times it's just a reactive service, right? Something's wrong, so you call. Not really looking at long-term strategic planning and IT infrastructure. To the point where our insurance of that disaster only covered $50,000, the first $50,000, because we didn't have the basic of two-factor authentications going. If we had two-factor authentications going, we would have been eligible for more insurance recovery money. So just little things like that I think got overlooked when the county had decided in, I think it was 2015 or 16, to do away with our IT department and contract those services out. So,
But all of that has been corrected. Our policies have been rewritten and redone, and we're current. Keena, did you have a comment about the cyber part of this?
I was just going to say, and those are the overhead costs that I'm including in that indirect cost plan to spread those costs out across those funds. So it helps pay for these important features that the county has to have.
and do we see a 31% cut in those as well?
No, Those are, you don't see it really, and I told all the managers to really budget kind of status quo with the IGS transfers that they see. I don't anticipate much of a cut in those. It might be an increase for a little bit or some of those funds that haven't been paying their appropriate share of that. But those are the cost of doing business, and you can only cut the cost of doing business so much, if that makes sense.
Sure. Gotta have HR, gotta have payroll, gotta have
Yeah,
finance.
we're governed by all these different laws when it comes to the finance and payroll and, the GFOA and all these different things. And so the cost of doing business doesn't go anywhere. Those administrative or overhead costs have to be allocated out appropriately across the board. We will potentially have to do FTE cuts in that as well if it's a number too big or if it's too big. But again, that's every department bearing the burden of the shortfall.
Okay.
John?
Kina, what about PILT funds? Do we know what that amount will be this year for this?
I don't off the top.
Okay.
We did get notice that we are
notice, yeah.
we'll be receiving our fully anticipated PILT funds. But I believe it was close to $850,000. Is that about right?
It's something like that. Yeah, I don't think they've told us the actual numbers, but I believe that's what it was.
And
Less than 900,000.
yeah, it was right in that range. It was what the anticipated number was that we had budgeted for.
Okay.
And, I will update the budget committee. One thing that we've been discussing was the potential of being able to bring back our ONC timber harvest dollars that essentially PILT helps to supplement.
Not much.
So it was, we won, DC appealed it, we lost in the DC appeal courts, we appealed it to the Supreme Court, and I just got notification, was it last night or the night before? I think it was last night, that the Supreme Court denied our request to hear our appeal. So we will not be seeing that. Now, the ONC committee is still fighting because there was a kind of an informal agreement back in the 80s to provide BLM with 50% of those timber receipts when the actual contract says that they only are to receive 25%. It was a voluntary thing. And so the ONC committee is just now going back to the table to fight for that additional 25% to come back into play. But, the key piece of that is, and what's unique about the ONC agreement is the term sustainable yield. It's one of the only contracts that has that term in it. Sustainable yield for the ONC lands is 1.2 billion board feet harvested annually. Last year, the BLM was really proud of themselves after doing 250 million. So we're still about 5x short on what sustainable yield should be bringing to our county. But point is, we won't be seeing an adjustment in those timber receipts in the near future.
The fight continues, just in a different format.
Yep. So not the best news.
All right, further discussion? No, you're good?
Good.
Anybody? All right, I think we're good. Again, thank you, Kina. We will
Absolutely.
adjourn this meeting now and look forward to our May 1st meeting. We should have some pretty detailed information. And thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.